Here we are on day 5 of the quarantine code review, where I'm using my time in quarantine to improve a beginner app I made a long time ago with everything I have learned as a professional developer. We're looking into this Minesweeper app that I built a while ago. Lots of fun. Check it out at minesweeper.zaklaughton.dev. But today we're going to dive into one of the functions. It's actually the same function we were working on as yesterday, but we're going to make it a little bit cleaner here. And I'm talking about this make blank HTML table grid. And that is the function that fires whenever I click new game here. It makes a new table. You can adjust the size, make it whatever you want. New game. We're running that function to make this table here. Now, yesterday we took the strings and we turned it into a document fragment to give us a little more control over the HTML element that was being generated. But today I'm looking at the function as a whole and how it looks. Now, looking at this, it's getting a little long, and it's hard to easily visually parse what's going on. We can figure it out if we go in here. The name is make blank HTML table grid. That's pretty descriptive. We can see we're making a new document fragment. But then once we start getting into these for loops, it starts to get a little nested and a little messy. So we say it looks like we're going for each row, we're going to make a new row, okay, and then within that we are going to make a new column for each column, and it's a little messy to figure out, and it'll get even more messy the longer these functions get. So how do we try to break this up? Well, this is where one of my favorite concepts of writing clean code comes in, and that is to have functions do only one thing. I'm going to show you a reference here, and I'll leave a link in the description. This is basically a GitHub repo that takes a bunch of principles from the book Clean Code and applies them to JavaScript and gives examples. And even this says it's by far the most important rule in software engineering is to have a function do one thing. And the example it gives is a bad example is emailing clients. It goes through a list of clients and then looks it up and then emails a client. Whereas it's much cleaner to instead say email clients and then have a separate one that says is active client. So instead of having this combined function that would be hard to test, hard to break up, hard to expand, we can have two separate functions that do distinct things. They do one thing each to make it easier to kind of parse through the code. So that's what I want to do here is turn this into something where each function does one thing to make it easier to read, easier to maintain. Now, you can also think of it as maybe somewhere you'd want to add comments. And this is where I say your comments should say why your code is doing something, not what. If you find that you need to write a comment somewhere that says what your code is doing, then there might be a cleaner way to write it. For example, we could write here, generate each row. And then for this inner one, we could say generate each cell. But wouldn't it be easier if we had a function just called generate rows and generate cells, which would make it much cleaner to write, less lines of code, less to figure out. So that's what we're going to hop into here. And this actually lays out exactly what I want to do. I want to take this, and in this for loop, let's make this a generate row function. And in the generate row function, let's make a generate column function. So let's start with the outer one here to generate rows. Basically, inside the for loop, I want to take all of this and basically assign it to a new row. So here we will comment this out for now. First, we'll make a copy. We're going to comment this out, and instead of let new row equals create element, we're going to have this new function return it. So let's call this new function create row, which we haven't made yet, and that is going to return what we want. So what are we going to need in this? Let's just copy all of this code down here first into our new function. So I'm going to cut it out of here. And we're going to make a new function. We're going to do this right inside the same function to keep it in the same scope. I found that to be a helpful way to just start out. If we need to break it out, we can do it later. But let's see, if we say function make row, and we won't give it any arguments for now, and we will just paste in the code from up there. Now, this wasn't meant to return anything before, so we actually want to return this element. So yeah, we got new row equals that. Let's make sure to, oh, so we're going to want to have this append child. We're going to keep this up here. But we want to make sure to return this new row because we're not dealing with the entire grid here. We're just dealing with the new row. All we want to do is make a new row and return it. So we have let new row there. We're assigning to a variable. We're doing everything we were before. We're assigning all the cells. Now we just need to return it. So then we say return a new row. And that should return it. We should also take a look here and see if there are any variables that we need to pass in because we are pulling code out of here. We want to make sure that everything that was available in the scope up here is also available now that it's in its own function here. So actually, no, let's just try to run it. Let's see what happens. I'm guessing if we come here to our code, we save it, refresh it, we're going to get some errors. Yep, I'm clicking new game, nothing's happening. And there's going to be something that says that it's undefined. Reference error, create row is not defined. Perfect. So if we come back here, where is create row? Create row. I could have looked at, there we go, create row. Oh, that is a dumb first one. Let's make sure we name this right, or we call it right. So we were saying we called it make row, not create row. So now, if we go back and check it out, let's refresh, try again, and I think we're still not going to generate. Let's see what the error is now. There we go, row number is not defined on script line 27. So let's go back, check out line 27. 27, there we go. Row number not defined. So we know that each time we're passing in a row number, we'll need to pass that in here. So let's pass that in as an argument. Row number, and we'll make sure the definition also has an argument. Row number, perfect. All right, let's save it, let's refresh, and let's try this again and see if there's any other missing variables. Oh no, it generated. Very cool. But we can see that it's much clearer up here now, and we don't need to use this generate each row now. We don't need a comment there because it's easy to see that for each row number we're making a row. It's very clear. And we don't even have to know what's going on inside make row. When we're trying to figure out what's going on here, we say, what does this do? It does this. And if we want to look deeper, we can say, okay, what does this do? And that's when we can pop open make row and make it a little more clear what it's doing in there. The next thing I want to do is, I mentioned before that we're going to leave this as a string, and this is about the time that I'm going to want to change this, because this isn't really doing one thing, making a string. What it's doing is it's making an HTML element, and then it's assigning this ID, and it's doing this background color, and it's making a class, and it's assigning this ID, which we don't want to have all these things in one line. So I think we can also split this into a separate make cell function, much like we were doing here. First thing I want to do to make this a little more explicit as well is to take out this R row number, C column number, and put it into a variable, which will also make it a little bit clearer what it's doing. So I'm going to cut that out, and we're just going to call it cell ID. And then we can come up here and we can say const cell ID equals these things. And we want to make sure to put the right kind of bracket there. Perfect. And this is going to be a string, so we'll add the backticks on the end to make sure it's a template literal. Perfect. Now cell ID, we basically are assigning that to a variable, so when we come down here it's easier to see, oh, that's a cell ID, that's what's going in there. So now we are going to we're going to change this from a string to a create element, much like we did in the last video. So instead of this insert adjacent HTML with a TD, we are going to say const new cell equals document.create element TD. And this will create a new TD element for us without all the properties. And then if we want to add properties into it, we can say new cell dot, and this is nice here. Look how VS Code shows us all the different things we can do with new cell now, which we weren't able to do with just a string. There's all these different properties or methods that we can use to just modify the HTML element. So what we specifically want to do here is add all the elements that are here in the string. So we'll start with the ID. We want the ID to be this here. We want it to be what we stored in the cell ID. So we'll say ID equals cell ID. And new cell BG color equals light gray is what we decided. Light gray. We have that down here. And then last, we're going to add the class here. So we're going to say new cell. And I don't remember exactly what class, how it's determined on the HTML property. So I'm just going to hit period and look through. I'm going to type class and see what we see. There is class list, class name, add class, has class. So a couple things I could do here. I know class list is an array, and then class name is just a single string. I'm going to do class name. We could probably also use add class, but I'm just going to do class name equals covered because it's similar to kind of the way we're doing all these other things. So now that we have all this here, we're basically creating an element the same as we did down here, and we're going to want to add it to the row, but we aren't going to insert a JSON HTML because that's used here to do what we're doing with the string. Instead, we are adding an HTML element, so let's get rid of this and let's do the old handy append child instead, which we have been doing all along on everything else. We're going to do it again here. We're going to say append child new cell. Okay, perfect. So now we have created the element. We gave it an ID, background color, class name, everything it had before, and we are going to append it to the new row. It should be doing the exact same thing it was doing before. Let's save it, refresh the page, check the code. Yep, still working, still clicking. All right, let's make sure flags work, click works, great. So everything is working just as it was. Now this makes it a little more apparent of why we'll want to make it a little more explicit in saying what this code does and make it out into its own make cell function. So we're going to do similar to what we did before. That new cell, we're going to say that's going to be returned from a make cell function, and we will cut all this out. We're going to make a new, let's do it inside the parent function there. There we go. Function make cell. And we're probably going to find some arguments we'll need to pass in here too. Cool. All right, cell ID. And so it shows here, this is showing up gray in my editor because it's not used. And we can hover over it. Cell ID is declared but never read because this function doesn't know about cell ID. It is up here. So we're going to need to pass in the cell ID. I can tell that right now. Cell ID. And then we're going to make sure in the definition that we are passing in the cell ID. Perfect. All right. And then new cell is not being used at all because we also are going to need to append that to the row. So let's make sure we're doing that. We'll say new row. Oh, actually, sorry, it's right here. This should be up here. So we are going to basically use this function to make the cell, and then we're going to append it up here in make row. I think that should be everything we need because that's the only variable in here being used, and we're passing that in. Let's check it out. We're going to save it, refresh the page, make sure everything's working. Oh, not working. We're missing something. So I clicked the new game. Nothing's happening. Let's check out the console. New cell is not defined. Script on line 33. Let's check it out. Line 33, new cell is not defined. Oh, it's not. So we put new cell up here, but that is not being passed into here. So we need to basically create a new cell, which will act as a variable template that we will then return. And look, we didn't even return anything from this function. So this is running and not returning anything. So silly me. So let's fix that right now. So we are creating this element here, but we're not assigning it to anything. So this is actually going to be new cell, which I'm actually surprised, since new cell wasn't defined, why VS Code didn't give me errors on any of these, but maybe it was because it was defined up here. I don't know. But now we have new cell defined, we assign things to it, and we need to return it. So let's return new cell. Save it. and now we're working 100%. Nothing is ever going to go wrong. Refresh, new game. Perfect. Everything is working. Great. So now we have, again, it's a little more clear here. If we can just ignore these at the bottom. If you want to know, say you're new to the code base, you're coming in, you say, oh man, what does blank make blank HTML table grid do? And you say, well, it makes a new document fragment, and then for whatever number of rows is provided, it makes a new row, and it adds it on, and it returns it. Now, some people might say this is doing more than one thing. Like you're making a grid, you're appending rows, you're doing things. There may be a better way to do it, but it's clear, at least at this point, that it's doing less things than it was, and we have abstracted out more code to make it easier to dig deeper if we want to. If we weren't concerned with make row, we wouldn't have to look in it at all. But say we want to dig a little deeper, maybe it's doing something a little weird, then we can choose to look into make row, dig a little deeper, see what's going on, and if we wanted to go any deeper, we could take a look in the make cell function here and see what's going on in here. So it's a little longer, but it is clearer to read because you have less that you need to look at right away. You can see everything and all the action you want to do right up here. So that does it for this video. Tune in next time when I start going through some of these other functions and doing some refactoring to make it a little bit cleaner. Check out the links in the description if you want to see a diff of the code I did today, or a link to my Twitter where you can get more updates on new videos and other dev tips or random dev thoughts I have throughout the day. Stay safe, wash your hands, and stay home if you can. Thanks.